I'm here today with Terry Tibbs. She's a small business human resource expert and founder of Your HRA USA and Terry Tibbs International. She is an entrepreneur and author of the soon-to-be-released Entrepreneur A to Z book series. She has assisted both managers and employees in optimizing skills, traits, and experiences in creating empowered and effective relationships. Terry has over 25 years of experience handling human resource issues for Fortune 100 companies. She has managed teams, built systems, and clearly understands the inner workings of human resources from the business management of an organization. In spending time with entrepreneurs, Terry began to understand that the small business community is underserved with affordable tools, tips, and resources for human resource needs. It is a gap and void that is costing companies thousands of dollars each year and leaving them exposed to potential liabilities and risks. She created her human resource business to make corporate-level human resource knowledge and resources available to small businesses at a fraction of the cost of a normal HR department. Today, Terry is going to talk about navigating through the HR jungle. And Terry, what a jungle it is. There's a lot of information that companies need to know about HR. And I want to welcome Terry. I want to welcome you and have the opportunity to speak with our members about the importance and the need for good human resources. Terry, welcome.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction. I am so excited to be a part of this webinar today. You know, as you mentioned, I have over 20-some years of experience in the human resources area, working with corporate America and small businesses as well. And the one thing I can tell you is I've seen companies use human resources and their whole management process very well, and I've seen them use it not so well. So it is really a pleasure to be here to share some of my expertise and experiences with the members today. Now, my vision is really to serve various communities of entrepreneurs with a focus on human resources through collaboration, education, and professional development. So this webinar fits very nicely with my vision. It is also my hope that should you have future HR needs, that we can partner together to ensure that your business runs efficiently, effectively, and becomes and remains HR compliant. So let's talk about some of the HR problems facing businesses. In my experience working with companies, I find there are three major problems. One, lack of understanding of the applicable state and federal laws. Many businesses spend countless hours searching the internet for answers to their HR problems. At the same time, they are worrying about whether they are compliant, all the while trying to find the time to do everything just right. Unfortunately, though, some of the information that's on the web is not always accurate or applicable to your state or to the size of your company. So that's in itself is a problem. A second problem is there's no policies or procedures in place to attract and retain qualified employees. You know, it's important that employees understand what you expect from them as well as what they can expect from you as a business. Implementing the wrong policies can at many times create risk for your company and also create conflict with the culture that you are trying to create within that company. And the third problem, the budgetary constraints. You know, basing employee decisions on misinformation and assumptions can lead to financial losses. Unlike firms that will offer you a canned approach for several thousands of dollars, we understand that your primary focus is to grow your business. That's why you're in business. And we can help provide companies with an approach to address their HR issues at a fraction of the cost of the HR department. Many people are not aware that the Department of Labor has hired hundreds of additional auditors to audit the HR practices of both small and large companies. And these audits are resulting in very large fines for these companies. So as you can see, that's an impact on the bottom line. Let's talk about some of the potential liabilities. This is just an example of one of the liabilities that people are facing. You know, fines up to $15,000 for not being compliant with things such as health and safety in the workplace. Many people are familiar with OSHA and some of their requirements: discrimination, benefits and leave, performance and termination, proper documentation, and signage. So, you know, as we think about the various risks that are out there, let's step back and assess some of these risk areas. You know, many small business owners believe that because they are small or have no employees, they don't have to adhere to employment laws and regulations. Now, while some laws do apply to only companies with larger employees, many laws apply to the very small companies as well. And failing to abide by employment laws can lead to employee lawsuits, Department of Labor or the EEOC investigations, or the loss of federal contracts. Additionally, you know, smaller companies sometimes do not establish processes around hiring, performance management, and company culture that both protect the business legally and provide competitive advantage. Again, you're in business to make money. Now let's take a look at some of the common risks that many companies face. The first one, independent contractors versus employees. You know, because many times businesses are trying to save money, they don't want to have to deal with payroll, taxes, and issues, they may opt to use an independent contractor or classify an individual as an independent contractor. And this can be a problem because misclassifying workers as independent contractors when they are actually employees could result in legal penalties. So let me just ask you a couple of questions. Are you appropriately classifying employees and contractors? Are you aware of the risk of inappropriately classifying employees as a contractor? I was talking with a business owner a while back, a gentleman who owns a nail salon. And he has 8 nail technicians. And I asked him, I said, do you have the applicable policies for your state and for the federal government? His response to me was, well, no, Terry, all of my employees are 1099 contractors. So I thought about it. Now, he tells these employees when to come to work. He tells them when they can leave. He tells them when they can take a break. And he tells them which customers to work with. But in his mind, he's calling them contractors. So, you know, the reality is that there is no single rule for determining whether a worker is an employee or independent contractor. Rather, the Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Services use a number of factors to make a determination. And there's like about 3 or 4 pages of questions that you will actually have to go through to try to make that determination. So it is risky. And the other thing to keep in mind is that many laws apply only if you have a certain number of employees. So if you misclassify an employee as an independent contractor, you could mistakenly conclude that you don't have enough employees for that certain law to apply to you. Example. So let's say that there's a law that says for companies that have 20 employees or more, this particular law applies to them. And you have 15 employees and you have 5 individuals that you're considering contractors. Well, in essence, if these employees are misclassified, you're at risk because you really aren't at the number 20. So this is something that is very, very serious that business owners really need to take a hard look at. What about hiring employees? Are you using legal practices in your hiring processes? Do you know the interview questions that can create a risk for your company? Do you know how to interview so you are able to identify the best qualified candidates for your company? You know, the hiring decision you make are among the most important business decisions you will ever make for your company. It's very costly. It's time intensive when you have to, number one, source for the candidates, and you have to go through the interview process, and then you have to train them, and then you find out that you made a bad hire. It could be like a nightmare for you. I worked with a manufacturing company that had a 12-hour shift, and it was a factory environment, and they had such a high turnover. And as we started to really dig into the issue to understand what the problem was, or what the root cause of the problem was, we found that the supervisors did not know how to interview. They did not know how to effectively select the right candidates. On the other side of the coin, many of the individuals that they were hiring had really no idea of what the job would be like. They had never worked in a factory. They didn't understand the 12-hour shifts, how hard that could be. So these employees would work until the first break about 10 o'clock and wouldn't come back. So once we trained the managers on how to effectively interview and select the right candidates, and also implemented an onboarding program to help to orientate new people into that environment, we saw that the turnover was reduced greatly. So again, it's really important to keep in mind that every hiring decision you make is a critical business decision. You're actually entrusting the new hire with your company, your customers, your finances, and your business reputation. So this is something that can be very costly if not done correctly. What about performance management? Do you establish clear goals and expectations for employees? Do you know how to coach and reward performance to ensure that you get the best from your employees? You know, a well-defined and documented performance process really helps you to develop and retain great performers. And it also provides documentation in case of employee termination. Many small companies that I talk with, they will tell me, well, no, we really don't have a process. You know, once a year, you know, we'll sit down with the employee. Well, many times, if there's no communication with an employee about their performance, they don't know what they need to improve. So they're assuming that what they're doing is what they're supposed to do. And then when it comes time for that once a year review, or comes time for a salary review, they're normally surprised because that's when they get the bad news. So it's important to communicate, to let people know how they're doing, and it also gives you, as a business owner, an opportunity to help them to develop. Because the more engaged the employees are, the more successful your company will be. Let's talk about misclassifications and overtime. This is an area that I see a lot when I talk to business owners. When we talk about, you know, whether or not employees should be eligible for overtime or not, many small business owners will make everybody salaried. It's easy. They say, oh no, all of my employees are salaried. Okay, so as I ask them to tell me, describe exactly what a particular person does, what I hear is, this is administrative, this is clerical. They may have given them a very fancy title, director of operations, but they are answering their phones, they are sending faxes. It's very administrative. And the reality is, this person is eligible for overtime. There was just recent, I read about a real estate office that had classified all of his employees as salary. What happened was, there was an audit, or someone complained, and they realized that these employees were not salary. they were non-exempt, which meant they were eligible for overtime. So they had to, it was about 11 employees, they had to pay something like $40-some thousand in back pay. Because chances are, if you are classifying someone as salary who should be non-exempt, you're not keeping records. So if you don't have records, the Department of Labor will more than likely favor with the employee and take whatever records that they may have. So it's really important that as you think about your employees, that they are classified properly. And I've also had business owners to tell me that one of their policies is that if someone works overtime that's not authorized, they will not be paid for it. Well, most states, that's illegal. If someone works overtime, that's eligible for overtime, even if it was unauthorized, most states will tell you you have to pay them. And you can discipline them, but you have to pay them. So auditors identify violations both through audits and through employee complaints. So you may have an employee today that's very happy with the status quo, there's no issues, but tomorrow they could wake up and all of a sudden not be that happy camper. And they could go to the Department of Labor. And when they go to the Department of Labor, there's normally an investigation, and in some cases, the Department of Labor and the IRS are partnering on a lot of these investigations. So it is really important that the employees that you have are classified properly. Let's talk about supervisor and manager training. Do the supervisors and managers in your organization understand their responsibilities related to creating a positive work environment? For example, no harassment. Have they been trained to handle tough situations with employees? Maybe you have supervisors that have been in that role for years, but have there been any type of refresher training? Laws change. They change constantly. So what was acceptable even a year ago or 2 years ago may not be acceptable today. And when a supervisor who's acting on behalf of a company makes a bad decision or take an action that's discriminatory, it puts the company at risk. Not only of being sued by the current employees, but former employees as well. And without proper documentation, without proper training, there's also the risk of losing any type of charge or lawsuit. So it's really important to make sure that the employees, the supervisors and the managers are trained. Discipline terminations. You know, a lot of business owners will say, well, you know, we live in a state that's at will, which means we can just terminate employees without a reason. Well, yes, you can. Most states are at will, which means that you can terminate an employee, and an employee can resign. There's nothing that says, unless it's a contract, there's nothing that says that employee has to remain your employee. But if you're terminating an employee, you just have to make sure that it is not based on any type of discriminatory reason. That's where the issue comes into play. You know, is it based on their race? Is it based on their sex? Is it based on their age? And it may not be, but you may have to prove to a third party that the action that you took was legal. Employee terminations and layoffs often lead employees to take legal actions. I'm a firm believer that many of the charges and the lawsuits that employees bring forth are because they're angry, because they don't feel respected in the decision that was taken. They're angry with how they were treated on their way out. So with, again, going back to the proper training for the supervisor, having the appropriate policies in place and understanding the laws actually minimize your risk in this area. Let's talk about culture. You know, a company's culture is created by its values as demonstrated by maybe the language or the decisions and actions of the people within your company. A company could be described as having a strong culture for service, or a strong culture for safety, or it could be a fun company, or it's an entrepreneurial type company, or strong integrity, high integrity, and the list goes on. Now, even if you have done nothing consciously to create or influence your culture, your company has a culture today, whether you realize it or not. Now, it may already reflect your values and support you in achieving your goals, or it may be one that gets in the way and makes you wonder why you missed a goal despite having the employees and the skill base and the company resources that you need. So I think culture is something that's very important. We don't talk about it a lot, but it exists. Many times when there's a new employee, you will have the questions will, one of the questions they will ask is, what is the culture like? What is it like to work there? What's the environment like? So think about it. Have you established clear policies relating to employee behavior? No harassment, no violence, no drug or alcohol abuse. Have you clearly communicated your expectations for employee behavior? These are the types of things that set your culture, because it goes back to what you value. And really, establishing and communicating policies can protect your company in case an employee acts in an inappropriate manner. So let's talk about, we've talked about, some of the risk factors, we've talked about some of the laws and being compliant, but let's take a couple of minutes and look at an example of some of the penalties that are out there. And these are real cases. I did not make these up. You have a company that had to pay more than $80,000 in back wages for 11 employees. Another company had to pay more than $38,000 in back wages. Department of Labor is recovering back wages and damages for employees misclassified as contractors. The government is broke, so they're looking for ways to get revenue. Companies face fines and penalties for hiring undocumented workers. The Department of Labor announces stepping up wage and hour enforcement. I mentioned earlier how they've hired all of these additional auditors. Workers' classification enforcement on the rise for large and small companies. Are we paying everyone's salary, or are we properly classifying employees to make sure that those that are eligible for overtime are getting overtime? Crack down on contractors versus employees. A small company was fined $7,216 after an unemployment tax audit. So I don't know about you, but $7,000 is a lot of money to have to give to a third party. Okay, so talk about the penalties that are out there. I have a short questionnaire that I want you to take, and as we go through each one, I want you to just think about your responses to these questions. I'm going to put them all up so that, oops, sorry about that. Do you have an employee handbook? If you have a handbook, is it current? Or do you have an employee handbook that you borrowed from someone else, from another company? Or is it a handbook that was created 3 to 5 years ago? As I mentioned earlier, laws change. And what may be applicable and appropriate for another company, if you borrowed someone else's handbook, may fit the culture that they're trying to create, but not the culture that you want to create for your company. A couple years ago, I purchased a handbook CD. I wanted to see what some of the resources that were available, really what they look like. And as I went through this CD for creating a handbook, I realized once I started to read it that it was created for the state of California. Nowhere did it say that, but I knew just based on some of the language. And for those of you that have ever worked in California, you know that many of the laws there are a lot more restrictive for employers. So by incorporating a policy, let's say, for the state of California, and you live in the state of Illinois, even if Illinois does not require you to adhere to that policy, by you placing that policy in your handbook, you could be held responsible for executing it in your everyday environment. Do you have a procedure manual? We talked about the handbook that will present the policies to the employees, but what about a procedure manual for your managers, your supervisors? A guide on how to conduct a performance appraisal, or guidelines for how to discipline and terminate employees. This is really to help your managers be successful. Are you aware of the state laws for your state? Do you know which posters to post? Do you currently post required posters? You know, there are many companies out there that sells posters, and they will send you information saying, you know, there's been a change, so you have to buy all the new posters. Well, the reality is many of the posters, not all the posters apply to everyone. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can actually download posters from the Department of Labor website for free. In the construction industry, in addition to the normal or the regular posters, there are a couple other posters that are required or could be required if you're working with federal contracts. Are your employees properly classified? We've talked about that. Do you know which federal laws apply to you? You know, there are the federal laws and there are the state laws. Many instances, they're the same. In some instances, the state law may be different. In those instances, the state law will be the law that you will need to abide by. Do you understand the pay practices for your state? Do you understand, you know, many people think that they, as a small business, they determine how they pay employees. But there are laws that are very specific, especially for the employees that are non-exempt. So, how did you do? If you answered no to even one question, you could be at risk. So, the question that I often ask myself, why don't companies lack good HR practices? And I think it's very simple. Many companies don't know what they don't know. Or they think that they are exempt because they're a small business. Maybe they haven't had any issues yet. It's a major expense. And you know, I think it's interesting, no issues yet. Everything seems to be going okay. But what I'm finding is with some small businesses that are very successful, that they have many, many issues. And because they were not, the foundation was not put in place, now they have to go back and redo some things that really creates a morale issue for their employees. It's taking them away from time where they could be focused on their business. So yes, there are reasons why companies lack good HR practices. We talked about a major expense. Yeah, a typical cost for HR solution can be expensive. On an average, $62,000 for HR solution. When you think about the cost of hiring an HR employee guys, $3,000 to $5,000. I had a gentleman tell me once that he actually paid someone $3,000 to do his employee guides. I couldn't believe it. You know, the training, the hiring and firing coaching. I have clients who, even though they have the policies, and I've given them the guidelines, but when it comes time to fire someone or to hire someone or to discipline someone, they call me. Okay, they don't say it in so many words, coach me on this, but this is what they're looking for. This is what I want to do. Help me to come up with the right words. You know, just coach me. This is really what they're looking for. So as you can see, on the average, $62,000 is a lot of money. So what about our solution? You know, as a constructors expert, we can provide HR solutions at a fraction of the cost of hiring an HR department. And we can also help you minimize your HR risk as you focus on growing your business. So as you can see, navigating through the HR jungle can be complex and overwhelming, which is why many people choose to ignore taking the necessary steps to ensure that their companies are protected. We have helped many companies uncover areas of liability, exposure, and help businesses implement ways to reduce those liabilities. So I invite you to schedule a free 1-hour consultation with me, and we will review things such as the HR compliance assessment. We'll discuss your business goals and objectives, because we're about being a strategic partner with you. We'll discuss your business HR challenges and address any immediate HR concern or issue that you might have. I'd like to thank you for your time today. I really enjoyed sharing my experience and providing you with some additional information on human resources. If you have additional information, you can email advisors@constructus.com or call 303-332-8503. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Terry. I know it's been a lot of information here for all of our members. And I got a couple of questions for you. You know, if you were starting a small business yourself, Terry, just from scratch, or maybe you already have a business in place, and you said, you know what, I've got to get going on some HR information here. What would be the first few things that you may do for yourself?
Well, the first thing I would do is really think about the vision that I have for my company. So many times that's the piece that we don't think about. What is the vision that I have? You know, what type of environment do I want to have? You know, what type of culture do I want to have for my employees and for my clients? And then once I get that set in my mind, then I start to think about the foundation. What do I need to put in place? What are the policies? What are the procedures? You know, what are the roles that I want? What are the positions? I would create role descriptions. I think so many times businesses fail to do that. They just hire people without any idea of what the role is and how that role will fit into not only the current environment, but the future environment.
That's great. A couple other questions that came in. You talk about policies and procedures. One of the questions was, do I have to pay somebody for vacation time if they don't take their vacation?
You know, I mentioned earlier how there's a federal law and there's a state law. It really depends on the state. Some states will allow the employer to make their own policies. Other states are very specific.
So it's going to vary from state to state then, obviously.
Yes, it can.
Okay, great. Well, Terry, that's all the questions we have for today. I appreciate your time, and we look forward to some other webinars with you that get in a little deeper on different parts of the HR development. And folks, again, if you have any questions, you can email us at advisors.com or advisors@constructus.com. So we appreciate your time today, and we look forward to another webinar with Terry. Thank you.